Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That has been part of my soliloquy since I left on September 23rd. Every day, sometime during the day, I start the day with a well-regulated militia. It's a good way to start. So here I am, back on Tall Tales, a little bit late. That's a good way to, yeah.
Welcome back.
That's a good way to do it. Kind of first day back on the job and show up about 2 minutes late, right, Jose?
Bob, you're never late because the show doesn't start without you.
I suppose you got a good point there, Jose, yeah. So I established the principle before I left that on the first day of every month, we would respectfully read the rules of engagement for Tall Tales, which I'm about to do, provided that I can find it here in my well-organized set of papers. I had it just a second ago. Yeah, I got the May 4, 2020 version instead of the most up-to-date version, but it's kind of like the Constitution. It doesn't change very much in the process. So here's the rules of engagement for Tall Tales. Listen to the radio talkers. Read the blogs and the blog comments in the papers. Check out the conversations in the bars and coffee shops, and it soon becomes apparent that answers are often more abundant than questions concerning important issues of the day. One of the functions of Tall Tales will be to state the questions for the answers that many seem so sure of, and then respond to those questions. Here are some of the answers that will be dealt with in the coming weeks, not necessarily in the order of their occurrence or importance. Number one, you can carry any gun anywhere at any time. Number two, we are second-class citizens. Number three, there should be term limits for senators. Number four, the Fed stole the Fed-a-dam from us. Number five, the job of the Civil Service Commission is to protect employees. So I've got a list here of 24 of these topics, all of which were topical at one time, some of which have been overcome by events. As an example, Dave Davis should just leave it alone. Well, It's too late for Davis to leave it alone. He won. So this is my default list of topics. If I'm ever in a situation where I've gone through the Jemmy Ekotny and I've gone through the card and I still got time left on the show and I don't have anything left on the card, I can always go to these default topics because they're always interesting. I mean, they're very interesting things to talk about, and I could always do a show just on these. Only once during the entire history of Tall Tales did I have to go to the default list of topics. Yeah. I also remind people that although the topics are numbered 1 through 24, I have a 0, a 00, and a 000, which are set out before 1 through 24. And you're always free to call up and provide this answer. Number 0, Bob doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, if you call up and say, Bob, you don't know what you're talking about, or you call up and say, Jose, Bob doesn't know what he's talking about, recognize that you have a heavy burden from then on. Because I wouldn't use an absolute here and say that I always know what I'm talking about, because I try to avoid absolutes whenever possible. However, if there were ever a good opportunity to use an absolute, it would be in that sentence. Bob always knows what he's talking about. Number 00, Bob still doesn't know what he's talking about. And 000, Bob still don't know jack. No! Yeah. So the purpose of 0 and 0, 00, and 000 is to put people at ease. The show is highly structured. It deals with subjects that I've had the chance to prepare about, oftentimes dealt with myself, but I welcome anyone to call in and discuss any item on the card, or Jemmy Ekotny, whatever. And even though you may come up a little short on knowledge, your call would still be entertained and more than likely welcomed. So that's that portion of Tall Tales. The list is not to suggest that there aren't plenty of other interesting questions or answers to take up every day. There are, and they can be addressed. Usually serious, sometimes humorous. Tall Tales will examine current events, government and politics, and occasionally drift into history, culture, religion, law, and once in a great, great while, but only very, very cautiously, rumors and gossips. Ooh. Yeah. Tall Tales is structured but can entertain whatever callers want to discuss it. In the original version of the rules of engagement, I say at any time. I've changed that. Can't do it at any time. If I'm in the middle of Lulian Guerrero versus the people of Guam, and you want to talk about compact impact, I'm not going to stop talking about the item on the card to talk about compact impact. Now, if you have an overpowering desire to discuss something that isn't on the card and doesn't arise in Jemmy Ekotny, then I can still entertain you if you'll wait until I finish an item on the card, or tell Jose, I'd like to discuss this when Bob finishes the item on the card. We may do that, or you may be reassigned to the end of the show. I may talk to you from Churchill Downs. So that has been one change that I had to make in the rules of engagement. Tall Tales is an issue-driven, fact-oriented, interactive talk show that invites audience participation. It has been rated the top-rated FM afternoon show in Micronesia. And I'll tell you who the rating agency was. It was the Tall Tales Think Tank Statistics and Research Bureau. And they rated the show #1. I don't want to hear any talk out there about maybe that rating is biased.
And by rumor, #2 and #3.
Of course, of course. The next item here, facts and no-nos. And here is some way that, people want to introduce what they want you to believe are facts. They start out by saying, well, they say.
Nope.
Yeah, but they say that, if you get a raise, you're going to pay proportionally more taxes because you go in a higher bracket. They say. Well, this they say introduction of a theoretical fact was problematic in the past, but now since we've redefined the meaning of the word they, it has even become more problematic because someone could say, they say that we're going to get our tax refunds next month, and the they could actually be one person. The way we screwed up the language here this last year. And here's another lead into a quasi-fact. Everybody knows that. Taking an item off my list of 24, everybody knows that Guam is under the Department of Interior. Well, everybody may know it, but it's wrong. That's the only problem with it. And then the old favorite here, well, we've always done it that way. There's no doubt in my mind that the United States ought to give us self-determination. There's no doubt in my, as though this is the absolute sine qua non of absolute factual information. There's no doubt in my mind, right? And my response to all three of those is no. And then I come back and say, how about a little analysis and some critical thinking? We got to do a lot of critical thinking here on Tall Tales. We don't take anything for granted. How often do we give someone the benefit of the doubt here on Tall Tales, Jose?
Mostly, hardly.
Never.
Never.
Yeah, never. We don't give out the benefit of the doubt. And we don't entertain the devil's advocate. The devil does pretty well on his own. He doesn't need any help here on Tall Tales. Okay, don't look for an abundance of common sense at Tall Tales. Your common sense is what tells you that the world is flat. Your common sense is what tells you that iron ships could never float. And your common sense tells you that an object that's heavier than air could never, ever fly. That's common sense. Quite often, people advance common sense as a standard of thought process that's almost pure gold. Unfortunately, quite often, common sense amounts to the prevailing standard of ignorance in a community. I'll give you the Jim Crow South as an example. Common sense tells you that, black people just aren't as good as white people, right? Yeah. Well, of course, common sense is to be valued, but not when it's a synonym for reverence for the status quo or for timidity. While an instant and firm grasp of the obvious may occasionally be necessary, sometimes it's good to delve into the theoretical. What would happen if? And occasionally examine the what-ifs. What if the Republicans supported Michael San Nicolas for governor? Yeah. Common sense, or call it common sense, a phrase invented by our friend Tom. So here's the deal on Tall Tales. Let's argue without being argumentative. Let's disagree without being disagreeable, which means primarily you got to be polite to the host. Yeah. Let's not play pin the tail on the talk show host. So the object of the show is not to call up and swear the toast of Tall Tales in, cross-examine him, hope to impeach his credibility on some important issue, and then ask for a jury instruction saying that Bob doesn't know what he's talking about. That's pin the tail on the donkey. Pin the tail on the donkey. Maybe pin the tail on the elephant in our case, right? Yeah. Now, here's a caveat. Look for provocative content on Tall Tales. Tall Tales thrives on disagreement. My object is not to find some common ground that we can all agree on so that we can all hum kumbaya in the background and live happily ever after, knowing that we're very likable and everyone agrees with, actually no one agrees with anything that's been said, but no one has been offended. This is the real game. That doesn't work. You know, if you really wanted to have a thought process that is productive, there has to be disagreement. That's how our court system works. We have an advocacy system. That's the way our legislative branch has evolved. We have Democrats and Republicans, etc. So once again, Tall Tales is an issue-driven, interactive show that invites audience participation. It has been rated the top-rated afternoon show in Micronesia. Usa dos na lenguaje, e fino English dan fino Chamorro loqui. Ki programahu, ike, ti programahu, programata. Yeah, our program, right? Tall Tales is the name, so look out for tongue-in-cheek aspects of the show and listen for Jose's horn. Yeah, so when you hear the horn, in case you missed my subtle sense of humor, my subtle sarcasticity, and my subtle plays on words, when Jose hears them, he beeps the horn, telling you, don't take this literally. This is Bob's sense of humor coming through the dialogue. Appreciate it. Chuckle, laugh, post a good comment on Facebook. Okay, so my job here is to make the complex understandable and, if possible, interesting. If it's not interesting, you ain't going to listen. Sometimes we confront, as you were, sometimes we comfort the afflicted. Sometimes we afflict the comfortable. Tall Tales is interactive, but no soapboxes allowed.
Nope.
Yeah, soapbox, meaning there are some people that have something that they want to say. They're so anxious to find an audience that they keep a wooden box in the trunk of their car, and anytime they see a half dozen people standing on a street corner, they park, get their box out, jump on the box and start giving a speech. Don't do that on Tall Tales. Don't call Tall Tales and start soapboxing. And don't call Tall Tales if you'd really like to have your own talk show. If you want to have your own talk show, best of luck. I might even call you, but I already got dibs on this one. Along the same lines, no filibustering. Make your point. Let me respond. We do a dialogue here, not a monologue and not a soliloquy. So make your point. Let me respond. Once you've made your point, don't filibuster by repeating it over and over again, as though the more times you repeat your particular argument, the more persuasive it becomes. Yeah, so no soapboxes, no filibusters, no pin the tail on the talk show host. Your humble, self-effacing, ever-modest host, that's me, is supported by the Tall Tales think tank, 4T, the foreign policy guru, a constitutional law and organic act expert, and a research, survey, and statistic bureau, and now a scriptwriter for the 19th floor. Yeah, so that's the rules of engagement for Tall Tales, and as you regular listeners know, I am the host. When I'm not here, nobody fills in for me. Now, I would put on my egotistical shirt here and say, nobody fills in for me any more than anybody fills in for Superman when he goes to work at the Daily Planet. But that's not my point. This is a show. It's not the Bob Klitzkie show. It's a show called Tall Tales. I happen to be the regular host of Tall Tales. When I'm not here, there will be an alternate host of Tall Tales who's not filling in for Bob Klitzkie. He is the host, the alternate host of the show until I come back. Okay, so we have Zemi Cotney, which is my idea of Meet the Press, and we have the card, and we've already disposed of the Second Amendment. Those are the three main functions of Tall Tales. Occasionally, I will sneak a sermon and at the beginning of the show. Not today. And I'm not going to turn this into a what I did on my summer vacation show either.
You left the slides at home?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'll talk about my trip a little bit tomorrow. I probably ought to unpack my suitcase and my brain first, but anyhow. Okay, let's go straight to Zemi Ikotny. And you will recall that I examined the editorials of our two daily papers, spot the errors, factual and grammatical and theoretical. If one is superior to the other, it would be awarded the coveted blue star, which never goes by default. A lot of times, no blue star is awarded. A lot of times, I pick on the newspapers by saying it appeared on the editorial page, and it says editorial on the web, but this ain't no editorial. And I think that's what we got today. So here's the Daily News. Our View, time to remember our loved ones. Could I have some music here, Jose? Time to remember our loved ones. As All Souls Day closely approaches, we remember, pray, and honor loved ones no longer with us. The day heavily reminds us of our grief as we try to heal from the pain and anger of when a loved one leaves us. A known day mainly practiced in Roman Catholicism, All Souls Day is a day for commemoration of all the faithful departed. Many of the island's residents visit the and it just goes on like this. Like we don't know what All Souls Day is about, right? And if you are a Roman Catholic, when it comes to the departed, you don't pray for them just one day a year. If you're a Roman Catholic, you don't know exactly where the departed is. May very well be in purgatory, waiting for the prayers of the multitudes to advance him from there to heaven. You're not going to be able to do that one day out of the year. Okay, so then the editorial goes from there to Joanne Messier, who is the wife of someone who was murdered here not long ago. No blue stars here today. You're mixing, what you're doing is you're mixing Tabasco sauce with lemon meringue. It just doesn't work out very well.
It was very awkward.
Very awkward. And had you not gone into the Messier part of it, then once again you've got something that probably should have appeared over the bishop's signature, not the editor's. Okay, the Post, not much better. Public school teachers, please volunteer so all kids have after-school programs. I don't know if I even want to go past the title on this. Public school teachers, please come in and work for nothing. Editorial page editors, please volunteer to spend a couple extra hours every day to work on your editorials to improve the quality of them. Guam Daily Post owners, please volunteer to reduce the price of your paper from 75 cents a day to 70 cents a day so more people can afford it. What is this? I have to admit a bias here. I am a teacher. I taught in the Guam Public Schools for 8 years. I'd like to think I did a good job. I was serious. I was committed. I was dedicated. And I spent an awful lot of time doing my job outside the classroom. But I would have been extremely offended if someone had come along and said, please volunteer so all kids have an after-school program, because the administration is not putting on after-school programs in 10 of the schools. The people that are supposed to do this aren't doing it. So would you please volunteer and come in and do it for nothing? Yeah. We hope that teachers and staff volunteering to take on additional after-school duties are well compensated. if you volunteer, you're not compensated, guys. No! Considering the time being invested and the risk associated, etc. The first sentence, there is a certain feeling of guilt a lot of people experience when asking a teacher to add something to their plate of responsibility. So I don't know if it's poorly headlined or what, but once again, if I were a teacher, I would be very tempted to go down and stand in front of the daily post office and say, please volunteer to write better headlines. No blue stars today, needless to say. Yeah, not even close. Okay, this is what I got on the card for today. I start out with lawyers. You want to take a break, Jose?
After you read the card, we can take a break.
All right. I start out with lawyers versus Halloween. I'm one day late. Yesterday was Halloween. Yesterday was a Sunday. My bad. I go from there to people of Guam versus Guam. And after that, I've got the First Amendment versus the military. Can the military deny you a religious exemption? We'll get into that. And then I've got Henry Rogers versus AT&T. Henry Rogers is also known as Abraham K. Kendi, Abraham K. Kendi, formerly known as Henry Rogers. Yeah, I'm working on changing my name. I don't know if you remember the joke about the immigrant from Poland. Yeah, he arrived and his name ended in ski, like so many Polish names, and the first syllable began with an S and ended with a T. So just sound that out in your mind, how that sounded, right? So his name was Herman blank Ski, right? And he got teased so often that he changed his name from Herman blank Ski to Henry blank Ski. Yeah, all right. So let's start out with lawyers versus Halloween. And once again, I go to my favorite columnist, Jonathan Turley, but Jose wants to take a break, as though I need another break after being gone for 5 weeks, Jose. But let's go. Let's do it.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY. Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Yeah, so I go to my favorite columnist, Jonathan Turley, who is a lawyer, a professor, a very smart guy, a newspaper columnist, and I had mentioned before he was here for our bar meeting a few years ago. I actually had a chance to shake and howdy with Jonathan Turley. And here's what he says. Here's my annual list of Halloween torts and crimes. Now, if you don't know what the word torts means, it's not that little that little pastry with a little sugar on the top that
comes in blueberry and apple.
Yeah. No, that's not what a tort.
Darn.
A tort is a civil wrong. So if you are in an automobile collision and the collision is your fault, you are a tortfeasor. Because you committed a tort. You were the one who committed the tort. The victim is called the victim. But the one who committed the tort is a tortfeasor. So remember that. Every civil, not every civil, but most civil cases involve torts, where one person, for one reason or another, injured the person or property of another person, to be distinguished from the criminal law, which deals with, obviously, crimes. So here's Turley's annual list of Halloween torts and crimes. Halloween, of course, remains a holiday seemingly designed for personal injury lawyers around the world, and this year's editions show why. Halloween has everything going for torts-filled holiday: battery, trespass, defamation, nuisance, product liability, and more. This year we have the usual fun frights caught on camera, nuisance complaints from triggered neighbors, and the occasional misdirected murder investigation. However, there are still noticeable additions that raise more legal frights. So with no further ado, here is this year's updated list of actual cases related to Halloween. In Berea, Ohio, the promoters of the 7 Floors of Hell. I wonder if they listen to Tall Tales and they're cobbing off with our 19th floor angle, huh? In Berea, Ohio, the promoters of the 7 Floors of Hell haunted house at the Cuyahoga County Fairgrounds appreciate realism, but one employee took it a bit too far. An actor brandished his real Bowie knife as a prop while pretending to stab an 11-year-old boy's foot. He then stabbed him. He said that he had been. Wait a minute. Let me put this together here. I'll go on for a minute. The accident occurred when the actor, 22, approached the boy and stabbed at the ground as a scare tactic. He got too close and actually cut through the child's shoe, piercing a toe. The injury was not serious since the boy was treated at the scene and continued through the haunted house. The case raises an interesting question of respondeat superior. There's a word that you'll hear lawyers batting around all the time. Let the superior respond. Respondeat superior for the negligent acts by employees in the course of employment. The question is, what is the scope of employment? The question is often whether an employee was on detour or frolic. A detour can be outside of an employer's policies or guidelines, but will be the basis for liability as sufficiently related to the employment. A frolic is a more serious deviation where the employee is acting in his own capacity for his own interests. In this case, the actor was clearly within the scope of employment and trying to scare the visitors. However, he admitted that he bought the knife in his personal capacity and agreed it was not a good idea to use it at the haunted house, according to Fox 8. That still does not negate the negligence, both direct and vicarious liability. Vicarious liability meaning that the employer is vicariously liable for what the 22-year-old guy did. So, you know, I think this happened after Alec Baldwin. Maybe Alec Baldwin was an inspiration for this. But anyhow, there was a failure to monitor employees and safeguard the scene. The employee's negligence is also likely attributable to the employer. Finally, this would constitute battery as a reckless, though unintended, act. Starting out with the idea that basically battery is an unprivileged touching of another person. Here's another one. In 2020, parents in Indiana were given a warning in Facebook post that the Indiana State Police seized holiday edibles featuring packaging that resembles that of actual name brands. Now, here's one for the real, I hope the real Joe Cruz is listening. But with the word medicated printed on the wrapper along with cannabis symbols. The packaging makes it easy for homeowners to confuse packages and give out drugged candy. You can imagine how many people came to trick or treat at that house that night, right? and how many times they came back bringing their friends back with them. Indeed, last year, 2 children were given THC-infused gummies while trick-or-treating, according to the police in Waterford, Connecticut. Such candies include the main active ingredient linked to psychedelic effects of cannabis, the plant from which marijuana is derived. Even accidental distribution of such infused candies would constitute child endangerment and be subject to both negligence and strict liability actions in torts. Now, here's a phrase, strict liability, that you want to be on the lookout for. Ordinarily, when there is a tort, in order to make A pay for the damage that he did to B by his tortious conduct, the B would have to prove that A did it intentionally or that he was negligent. Ordinary negligence, gross negligence. But there is a category of torts called strict liability, where it's not necessary for the injured party to prove anything except that he was damaged. Classic example of strict liability is a dynamite factory. If you were operating a dynamite factory and you're observing every single possible precaution in the books and the dynamite factory blows up and kills somebody, he doesn't have to prove that you were negligent or you did it because the manufacturer of explosives incurs strict liability. Distribution of marijuana, very likely a strict liability crime. So if you don't know if it's marijuana or not, I was going to say flush it down the toilet, but that's not a very good idea anymore. We probably have some of the most highly drugged sewer systems in the world. I previously have written how the fear of razor blades and apples appears an urban legend. Well, give it enough time and someone will prove you wrong. That's the allegation of Waterbury, Connecticut police who say that Jason A.C. Rax, 37, put razor blades in candy bags of at least 2 trick-or-treaters. Wow, what a sadist. Rack's razor defense may not be particularly convincing to the average juror. According to police, Rax explained that razor blades were accidentally spilled or put into the candy bowl he used to hand out candy. Yeah. However, police noted that he provided no explanation as to how razor blades were handed out to children along with the candy. The charge was brought soon after Halloween in 2019. Rax is now charged with risk of injury to a minor, reckless endangerment, and interfering with a police officer. He could also be charged with battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But it's not clear if any children were injured. So let's distill this a little bit. Next Halloween, keep your marijuana and your razor blades away from the bowl at the front door that you use to give kids candy. And if you want to scare a kid, put your knives in the silverware drawer. Don't have them out and be playing with them. Stephen Novak, an artist from Dallas, believes that Halloween should be a bit more than traditional plastic pumpkin and a smiling ghost. Police were called to his home in Texas over a possible murder. They found a dummy impaled on a chainsaw with fake blood. Another dummy hanging from his roof. A wheelbarrow full of fake dismembered body parts and other gory scenes. Neighbors called the display too traumatizing. Yeah. Police responded by taking pictures for their families. Tort action for intentional infliction of emotional distress is likely to fail. There must be not just outrageous conduct, but conduct intended to cause severe emotional distress. Courts regularly exclude injuries associated with the exercise of free speech or artistic expression, even when accompanied by buckets of fake blood. And then finally, Downey Park in Wildwater Kingdom of Pennsylvania tells customers that if they come to their Halloween haunt, quote, fear is waiting for you. In 2019, a new case was filed by Shannon Sacco and her daughter over injuries sustained from unreasonable scaring. They're seeking $150,000. Unreasonable scaring. Well, it's time for my corny sense of humor here. You know, if I had read this yesterday, if I'd have been here on Guam and out and about, I would have worn a mask that covered my whole face, not wanting to be accused of intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Unreasonably.
Yes. Or use that old line, how do you like my mask? Yeah. Okay, so much for Halloween. It's over for another year. We move on to yeah, let's take a short break here, and I'll come back to the governor versus pre-condemnation owners.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Through the years, we've been a friend to the neighbors we have known. Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Okay, so here we go again. We got about 10 more minutes before that big halftime show that I've really been jonesing over, not seeing here for a long time. So the title of this item on the card is The Governor versus Pre-Condemnation Landowners. A little background here. We know that the United States government took several parcels of land here on Guam through a process known as eminent domain, often referred to as land condemnations. And whenever I talk about eminent domain, I start out with the Fifth Amendment to our United States Constitution, which ends with this phrase. It starts out, no person shall be blah, 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 and it ends with this phrase, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's what the Constitution says. Now, there's no grant of authority in the Constitution that says the United States government can take private land. So where does that power come from? And the answer is that it's an incident of sovereignty, that every sovereign nation, because it is sovereign, has the ability to take land owned by people living within its borders for its own use. A lot of countries, you don't have to pay just compensation. You don't have to pay nothing. And this was, a lot of the action in the so-called banana wars between the First and Second World Wars, where various Latin American tin horn presidents would come into office and nationalize the assets of American companies. Nationalize meaning take it over, take it away from the owners, not pay them a nickel, etc. The best example of this, of course, would be Fidel Castro, who, after he became the president and el máximo líder de Cuba, took all of the mafia's gambling casinos away from him. Well, that was unfair, huh? And paid them not a dime for it. And some people would trace that action by Castro as the root cause of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which is something we can talk about on another show. But in the United States, if the government takes private property, it has to pay just compensation. Well, how do you arrive at just compensation? There's case law all over the board on that. A jury determines what just compensation is, but there are a lot of rules involved. And it's something like fair market value, but a little bit more complicated than that. So we would assume that any land taken after August 1st of 1950 by the United States government resulted in just compensation being paid to the owners. Before 1950, it's hard to make that argument, because before 1950, when Guam was under what amounted to martial law, where you had a military governor who was executive, legislative, and judicial branch, appointed someone to handle the land claims, and there was dissatisfaction over the value given to the land taken by the United States during those times. And of course, we didn't have the real rule of law here before the Organic Act came along. Now, had an ambitious lawyer, ambitious, imaginative lawyer practicing here after the Organic Act passed, it might have been possible to bring suit on those pre-1950 claims. I could think of a couple legal theories that might work, but it didn't happen. So the people whose land was taken before 1950 have a much stronger argument than those whose land was taken after 1950. Now, there's a lot of confusion that comes in here, and that's this, that people's real property is taken. They contest the determination of just compensation. They go to a jury. Some people get twice what the government offered, but they're not satisfied because they didn't want the land to be taken. It wasn't fair. It wasn't justice. So because they didn't want it to happen, they figured they should get more money. It unfortunately just doesn't work that way. But that's some of the dynamics involved here. Now, I wouldn't tell you that I've done an exhaustive study, but I have looked around and I have never found a situation where the United States government took private property and turned it into military bases, and then when it no longer needed the military bases, did the land go back to the pre-condemnation owners. I'm not saying it never happened, but I'm not aware of it. Because when the United States condemns military property condemns private property for military purposes, it takes what's called fee simple absolute title. There's no remaining interest left in the pre-condemnation owner. So all of the bundle of rights, all of the rights and liabilities of that property go to the United States, and there's nothing to return because the condemnation proceeding extinguished the landowner's rights. Now, you may say that, yeah, it's not fair, it shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. It's always been that way, and it's always been that way everywhere, and chances are it's always going to be that way. The United States did a lot of condemning. They took Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Fort Hood, Texas. Fort Hood, Texas, I did a little read up on Fort Hood, Texas. In a matter of days, 6 villages were basically wiped off the map because the United States came in and took it over and used it as a place to train infantry and armor. So it's sad, and I hear all of the sad stories about, Sumai was so wonderful, and we all lived in Sumai, and the military took Sumai away from us, and we wound up in Santa Rita, and now we can only go there once a year, and it just isn't right, so they should give us piles and piles of money for that. Just compensation is the name of the game. Then the matter is further complicated here, at least for the post-1950 claims, where the argument lies that just compensation was paid. Then in 1977 or 1978, Mr. Wampet got a bill through Congress to give pre-condemnation owners another chunk of change. And they didn't have to prove that the first award was erroneous. They basically had to prove that it wasn't a good process. So I think $39 million was paid out. And this still wasn't the end of it, because after having paid for some of the land twice, that land went back to the pre-condemnation owners. If you're following along with the story about the land on the annex where the wastewater treatment plant has been built, that huge chunk of land was returned to the Torres estate. Torres, the ancestors of the people in the Torres estate owned the land before the war. A lot of the buildings on NAS returned to the pre-condemnation owners. The government of Guam decides they need it, so then they got to buy the land back that they already had. And I have gotten into the so-called Magahaga Highway matter, where the United States gave most of NAS to the government of Guam, and I'll pick up on that right after the big halftime show. Most of NAS to the government of Guam.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Big G20 discussions. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. President Biden met with world leaders Saturday in Rome and discussed the potential return of Iran's nuclear deal.
A White House official is telling us there is no date on the schedule for the restart of those talks with Iran about their nuclear program, even though President Biden said today there is a date on the schedule.
Mr. President, when would you like talks with Iran to resume? Let's schedule to resume. What is the next step?
The president was mistaken. As an official tells us, officials are just hoping to have something on the books by the end of November. That is because leaders from the U.S., UK, France, and Germany are alarmed about nuclear activities they don't think are related to a civilian nuclear program.
Fox's Peter Doocy. Meanwhile, former President Trump criticizing the Biden administration for its handling of the Afghanistan withdrawal.
I think Afghanistan was a disaster. Not getting out. I was the one that set it up. I brought it down to 2,500 soldiers, and we were in great shape, and they weren't going to touch us. They knew they weren't going to touch us. And then he took out the military before he took out the people.
Trump speaking on Fox's Justice with Judge Janine. And Democrat sources indicate a possible Tuesday vote on two key bills tied to President Biden's agenda.
Democrats are delaying a vote on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Progressives want to see final text and a commitment from Senate Democrats to support a nearly $2 trillion social spending plan first. A framework on that measure has been released by the White House. Legislative text is likely to change, however, with several lawmakers pushing for additional policy provisions. The $1.75 trillion bill is far less than an original proposal and does not include provisions sought by President Biden, providing community college tuition and paid family leave. Jared Halpern, Fox News.
America is listening to Fox News.
Leah Dunca from Security Title here with a little information about trusts. A trust is a legal entity capable of owning property. It can protect property from issues such as lawsuits or divorce and can be used to distribute property and avoid probate. Many trusts start as revocable but become irrevocable when the initial trustees die. Work with your estate planning attorney to see if a trust is a good fit for your family property. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Actor Alec Baldwin opens up to Fox News Digital about the fatal prop gun incident on the set of Rust in New Mexico.
Fox News Digital caught up with Alec Baldwin, and again, he could face charges for fatally shooting the cinematographer and wounding the director on that set. But it didn't stop him from opening up today about that tragic incident. Speaking for the first time during this ongoing investigation, he called the cinematographer his friend.
I've been ordered by the Sheriff's Department in Santa Fe. I can't answer any questions about the investigation. I can't. It's an active investigation in terms of a woman dying. She was my friend. She was my friend. The day I arrived,
his wife there, she got pretty upset as she was being asked, or as her husband was being asked some of these questions about this tragic incident. In addition to cooperating with authorities and speaking with police daily, Alec Baldwin also says he met with Hutchins' son and her husband.
Fox's Christina Coleman. And police say a man dressed in Batman's Joker costume and brandishing a knife on a Tokyo commuter train stabbed several passengers before starting a fire, which sent people scrambling to escape and jumping from windows. 17 passengers were injured, including 3 seriously. The 24-year-old suspect reportedly told police he wanted to kill and get the death penalty. Plus, a man is dead in Spain after being gored by a bull.
That 55-year-old man bled to death after being gored in the leg by a bull during a festival in eastern Spain in which the animals are released onto local streets. Town officials in Onda saying they'd suspend Sunday's last day of bull running following the goring on Saturday afternoon during the annual festival. It's the first known death during a running of the bulls since festivals returned to many towns across Spain after a pandemic-imposed pause. The most well-known event internationally is Pamplona's San Fermin Festival, which is expected to return this coming spring. Paul Stevens, Fox News.
I'm Mary Corsetti, and this is Fox News.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Need to finish the job or start one the right way? Get the right stuff at East West Rental Center. You can switch to easy mode using industrial strength equipment. With years of experience helping builders, East West Rental gives you exactly what you need. Tools for landscaping, concrete, lifts, trucks, tables, tents, chairs, water blasters, excavators, forklifts, air compressors, and more. Call East West Rental Center at 646-1463 or visit them in Upper Tumon. Open Monday to Saturday from 7 to 5, Sundays 8 to 5.
Guam Auto Spot has the best selection in Buick, GMC, Mitsubishi, and used cars like the 2021 Mitsubishi Mirage starting at $127 per paycheck, 0 down. Call 671-478-AUTO to take a test drive or get pre-approved online at GuamAutospot.com.
Okay, so here we are, another big halftime show. Man, it's still inspiring, isn't it, Jose?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the best show going. Okay, so I left off here talking about eminent domain, private property on Guam being taken by the United States for defense purposes. And I got to NAS. And recently I was able to get to the bottom of a rather cryptic statement by our lieutenant governor dealing with the Magahaga Highway, saying it was now necessary to convince people that we would have to condemn their land again. So what happened was that NAS, most of NAS was given to the government of Guam by the U.S. Navy. Now the government, our legislature passed, and the governor signed back in the 25th legislature, a bill that said any time that land is returned by the military, it goes to the Ancestral Lands Commission, who should determine who the pre-condemnation owners were and deed the land to the pre-condemnation owner or to the heirs of the pre-condemnation owner. So much of NAS was given away. When it came time to build the so-called Magahaga Highway, which is a pretty nice road, it is only 4-lane at the beginning, it was determined that all of the real property necessary to finish the road wasn't there because it had been given away. So the government of Guam asked the U.S. Department of Transportation, won't you condemn enough land here for us so that we can finish this highway? And the answer back was, no, we're not going to condemn land that that was yours and you gave away. We're not going to do that. So I suspect there are some people out there who are saying, well, it's only fair that the pre-condemnation owners get their land back. And there are others who are saying, well, yeah, but who's going to pay for it? And, of course, the who is all of us. That's who's going to pay for it. Because ordinarily when the United States government has excess land, it offers it to other federal agencies. If they turn it down, then it offers it to state and local government agencies who will put it to work for a public purpose. And that is part of the deed of conveyance. And it was, again, with the wastewater treatment plant land, the land, what I refer to as the Teen Challenge land, up at the junction of Marine Corps Drive and Army Highway. That land was supposed to be used for a public purpose. Now, I suppose you can make an argument, well, giving the land back to the pre-condemnation owners is a public purpose because they'll do something with it. That's a weak argument. And it's an argument that the government of Guam would lose if it has to go to court on that, and it may very well have to. So that's the background of where we are now. The land was taken before 1950 under questionable circumstances. After 1950, apparently within the confines of the U.S. Constitution, just compensation was paid for the land. In 1977, the land was paid for again. And now much of the land has gone back to the pre-condemnation owners. Oh, and one other thing about NAS, then what do you do with land that can't be returned to the pre-condemnation owners? For instance, land under the runway at NAS. Well, that turned out to be very controversial. We'd have to get Benny Crawford to explain that one to us, because the first approach was, well, we will create a fund for those owners and we will give them annual payments for the value of their land. But then the land was given to somebody else. So it's pretty murky. So the latest thing that happens is this. The governor has decided that she wants to build a $1 billion health complex, a hospital, mental health, and public health all in one campus. Sounds like a great idea. And not from the beginning, but even before that, from the get-go, if you're listening, Chief Ignacio, the governor said she wanted to build that complex out on Route 15, also known as the back road to Anderson, also known as Hall Road, H-A-U-L.
I did not know that.
That road was built to haul workers and construction supplies from the camp of Brown Pacific and Maxon in Mangilau up to Anderson. So for a long, long time, that road was known as Hall Road, Haul. So Eagles Field out on Hall Road is right across from Swaglerville, if you know where that is, not far from Fadian Point. And the governor said that our local ComNavMar was so grateful for the help that we gave to the Teddy Roosevelt when they pulled in here with a shipload of coronavirus that he was going to give her some land. And that was the land that they talked about. So as this story unfolds, the Navy said, yeah, we're going to give you a 100-year lease on that real property so you can build your hospital there. Well, then the question arises, well, what about, and people use this phrase, I will not permit it on Tall Tales. What about the original owners? Well, the original owners probably go all the way back to the Spanish times. And I've had Michael Israel, well, wait a minute, I've had an anonymous caller on this show state that back during Spanish times, awarding fee title to real property was unknown, that landowners would be given what amount to licenses or permits to farm particular areas. But an awful lot of what is claimed as title to real property is pretty shaky. So when you start talking about original landowners, you're bringing something new into the mix. Another interesting fact here is that some of the people who were large landowners took advantage of the fact that the naval government had a real property tax. And if you didn't pay the tax on your land, they sold the land. And a lot of the large landowners got their land in tax sales. Not quite as meritorious as you might, they might want you to think, oh, you know, that land has been in our family, et cetera. So when we're talking about giving the land to somebody, what we're actually doing is the pre-condemnation owner, that is the person who had record title the day before the land was condemned. If that person is dead, then under no special law, just under the laws of intestate succession, that land would go to the intestate heirs of the landowner unless he made a will. And a properly drafted will would pick up that after acquired title. So that's where we are now. A lot of background to get up to Troy's latest magnum opus on this on Candid News. It's titled, Secretary of the Navy Intended to Give Back Land the Governor Wants to Take for a Hospital. The Secretary of the Navy informed Governor Leon Guerrero 10 months ago that he intended to declare excess land it condemned from 18 families decades ago at surrounding Eagles Field in Mangilau. Now, those 18 families are called what, Jose?
Original landowners?
Try again. Pre-condemnation.
Pre-condemnation.
Yeah, they are not the original landowners.
That was just a test.
Okay. You're just checking me out to see if I was on...
Checking our audience out.
Okay. If those lands are declared excess and returned by Congress, by Guam law, they are to be returned to the heirs of the pre-condemnation owners. It sounds like Troy Torres listens to this show. He knows the right vocabulary. Or the ancestral landowners. Instead, and despite Oka Point being available and ready for the construction of a new hospital, Miss Leon Guerrero is negotiating a 100-year lease with the Navy for the land rather than having the Navy start the process of returning it. I'm pleased to now identify the DoD parcel for the medical complex and add it to the list of parcels eligible for return to the territory of Guam. Navy Secretary Kenneth Brathwaite wrote to the governor on January 15 this year. If the Navy is willing to return the land, then why does the governor of Guam want to lease it instead? Can we have some sinister music there? that would be.
That was horrific.
Yeah, if I were discussing root canals, that would be the one to play.
We have a lot of happy music in this table here.
All right. The Director of Land Management is authorized and required, here's a quote, if the Navy's willing to return the land, why does the governor want to lease it? And here's a quote from Guam law. The Director of Land Management is authorized and required to reserve all future lands received by the government of Guam declared excess and ensure that all information pertaining to excess lands, both current and future, are sent to the Commission for entry into the Excess Lands Registry. It's Public Law 2545. According to the statute, which has governed the return of ancestral land since former Governor Carl Gutierrez signed it into law on June 9, 1999, lands held in the Excess Lands Registry are distributed until claims by the heirs of the pre-condemnation owners are extinguished. In the case of the Fidean lands adjacent to Eagles Field, where the governor is rushing to build a $1 billion hospital, there are 18 pre-condemnation owners whose heirs have legal claims to the lots. The lease is a tool to circumvent Gov Guam law. The legislature recognized the need of private landowners to pursue appropriate remedies to redress the harm done to them and to Guam as a whole. When a substantial percentage of the land on Guam was taken by the naval government or the government of the United States through proceedings in eminent domain or under the threat of eminent domain following World War II, the first paragraph of Public Law 2545 states. According to the family of at least one of the pre-condemnation owners, Maria Cabrera, the original landowners were not justly compensated. Her son, Vince Cabrera, told Candid his mother was paid only 6 cents a square meter by the Navy. Okay, now, this is not an easy subject to understand. So when you're talking about just compensation, you're not talking about what the land is worth today if it had been taken in 1950. You're talking about what just compensation would have been in 1950. So land out on Hall Road in 1950, probably before Hall Road was even built, agricultural land, not particularly valuable. Perhaps 6 cents a square meter was right compensation. How much would the land be worth today? Millions. Because now somebody wants to build a hospital on it. But it just doesn't work that way. You don't look at the land and say, well, that land is worth $300 a square meter, and they only gave my grandmother what was the figure here? 6 cents a square meter. When that's just not fair. To further complicate the matters, there was very little commerce on Guam until the Organic Act, certainly, and until 1962, when the lifting of the security clearance for sure came about. The reason that the government of Guam got into so many things is because there was no civilian economy here before the Organic Act came along. That's why the government ran the phone company, the power company, the water company. Everything that was done had to be done by the government because there was no civilian economy. You look back at the Spanish times, it was little more than subsistence agriculture on the island. So the fact that somebody got 6 cents a square meter when the land was taken, interesting, but certainly not dispositive. The land would be, extremely valuable nowadays. So if the Tri-Torres position were followed, what should happen is this. The Admiral gives the land back to the Government of Guam, to Ancestral Lands Commission, Ancestral Land Commission to heirs of 18 pre-condemnation owners, valuation of several $1 million, government buys land. I understand feelings, and I'm using the word feelings here rather than thoughts, but I understand the feelings involved But as a general principle, it's very difficult to get someone to pay for something that he got for nothing. That usually doesn't result in good feelings. And that's exactly what Troy is advocating here, that even though the land would come to the government of Guam to build a hospital, the government of Guam should have to pay for it apparently a third time. So that's kind of the background on this right now. Troy goes on to say, Miss Leon Guerrero, in an interview on KOM's The Link last month, insisted the original landowners, slip up, had already been compensated for the land. True. Even if the Navy had paid fair market value for the land, which it didn't. And how do we know that? Oh, it was only 6 cents a square meter. It couldn't have been fair. That land is worth hundreds of dollars a square meter nowadays. Guam law is clear about what is to be done with return lands where there exist heirs to the original landowners. Return it. And if the land cannot be returned because it's under public use, then a trade or just compensation is to occur. The only way around the law is for the Navy to not declare the land excess and for Congress to not return the land. As late as January this year, though, the Secretary of the Navy had intended to declare it excess. Here we have the Secretary of the Navy himself offering to turn the land, and our governor, who is supposed to represent the people of Guam, saying, no, thank you. Keep it. We'll just lease it from you. What is the real story here? What significant financial interest is swarming beneath the surface? In addition to the obvious questions we raised about the documents disclosed to Candid following our Freedom of Information Act request for them, raise additional questions the Navy must answer as well. Doesn't Carlotta Leon Guerrero answer for the Navy? Yeah. The documents show that at various levels of the Navy, including the Guam Real Estate Division, Navy representatives have been actively engaged in communications with not only the governor, but also with Vera Topaznia, the governor's executive director of the Community Defense Liaison Office. The document shows several others involved in these land negotiations, including Joe Bora, Director of Land Management. Now, there's something fishy going on here, right? When the Navy officials are talking to the government of Guam about land they're thinking about transferring to the government. That can't be right. They should never talk to each other. Why have all these parties, including representatives of the Navy, been negotiating land matters without any public disclosure? There are no documents that even suggest any of these meetings were held in any public forum. They should have done it before the Commission on Self-Determination. We had even asked for minutes of meetings, yet none were provided to us. It is thus justifiable to conclude that the Navy itself has simply followed the steps of the governor and itself also by passing Guam's ancestral land laws. It would be impossible for the Navy to simply say they were not aware of ancestral land claims. Why is that important? It was the Navy itself that initiated unconstitutional condemnations of ancestral lands. A conclusion reached by hundreds, including former Navy officers over the years. Yeah, unconstitutional. And the Ninth Circuit said, no, there was no. It's unconstitutional. Let's go back to the read-in for Tall Tales here, and I'll find the appropriate authority for that kind of remark. If I can find, Yeah, here we go. They say that those condemnations were unconstitutional. Are you convinced, Jose? Let me try another one. Everybody knows that those condemnations were unconstitutional. And, okay, here's the clincher. There's no doubt in my mind that those condemnations were unconstitutional. With proof like that, the argument...
I'm convinced.
Yeah, the argument's over. That's it, yeah. Troy goes on to say, we cannot simply turn a blind eye to the Navy and let them continue some land scam just because the governor is the principal party of this scam. Can't the Navy do with its land what it wants to do? Isn't that the meaning of fee simple? The Navy comes along and says, yeah, we got some land here that we don't need, and we want to let the government of Guam use it, have it, whatever. This is what we want to do. You can't do that. That's not what we want you to do when you give your land away. As more and more documents surface from our continued FOIA requests, we at Candid feel that the Navy also has a legal obligation to disclose to the community what's going on. Now, what would be the source of that legal obligation? The feds have a very well-developed FOIA process. In fact, we copied ours from them. So if there is a legal obligation and Troy says he's doing FOIAs, we'll find out what that obligation is, if there is one. In our continued commitment to report the facts to all of you, it is now time that federal FOIA requests for documents be written to the United States Navy as well. And we will, Troy says. Okay, well, I gotta throw one monkey wrench into this this whole theory of Troy's, and that's this: that a leasehold interest for less than 1 year is what's called personal property, and it's bought and sold away like you'd buy or sell a pistol or a car or 40 tons of coal or whatever. It's personal property. But if it's a leasehold interest for more than 1 year, then it's real property. And the key word here is estate. A leasehold interest for more than 1 year creates an estate in the lessee. So if the Navy leases Eagle Field to the government of Guam for 100 years, then that estate has been returned to the government of Guam. Yeah. And if the governor of Guam wants to follow along with the Troy Torres theory, then she conveys that leasehold interest to the Ancestral Lands Commission, who then conveys it to the 18 original owners. And we see what happens after that. People think that, well, when you're talking about land, it's got to be something you go out there with a shovel and start moving around. But, you know, land ownership obviously is different from the ownership of personalty. This telephone in my hand here is personalty. How do you know it's mine? Well, who's hanging on to it? Whose pocket is it going into? Who possesses it, right? You can't possess a piece of land. You could get a backhoe out there and fill up 40 dump trucks with the dirt.
Put them in mason jars.
Put it in mason jars, take it somewhere else. No, it just doesn't work that way. So this is a complicated undertaking, I think made complicated by the fact that the government of Guam the Guam legislature and the government of Guam is doing something that almost without precedent, which is to take public property and give it away to people because they were the owners before the land was taken in eminent domain. And once again, I'm not weighing in on the fairness of it or the way people feel about it. I can understand how they feel about it. Full disclosure, we got some of that money ourselves because my wife's mother and father owned some land out there not far from Hall Road. It was taken by the governor to build what was called the transmitter annex for Anderson. And then it was returned to the government of Guam for the use of the Guam Community College, and then Ban Pangilinan saw to it that it was released from the Guam Community College and went to the Ancestral Lands Commission. So, you know, I've benefited from it. I didn't get the money; my wife got the money, but you know, it's kind of the old custom. If I get a check, you know, when I get my check for Tall Tales, I just sign it and I give it to her. But you know, if I want to go down and shoot pool on Saturday night or something, she give me $10. So
wow.
it works out pretty well.
And if you do your chores, 20.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's the second item on today's card. Okay, let's go to Wrigley Field for the 7th inning stretch.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pika's Best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Okay, so here we are, Wrigley Field, Chicago, the 7th inning stretch. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was relatively close to Wrigley Field, taking I-94 up through Chicago, up to the Wisconsin border. Probably came within 3 or 4 miles of Wrigley Field. I should have swung by, I suppose. 7th inning stretch, and we come back to this item on the card, the First Amendment versus the military. And this is something that Ray surfaced on his program this morning. According to Ray, military commanders are not honoring a proffered religious exception to the vaccination requirements made mandatory for all soldiers, etc. And wanted to know my thoughts on that. And my thoughts were, you know, the first thing I mentioned was that courts are not going to inquire into the truth or falsity of a given religion. So any commander who doesn't accept a religious reason for not taking the vaccine is skating on what could be some relatively thin ice if he starts inquiring, well, why are you saying it's against your religion? So I've got this really interesting article here by a guy named Jared Goldstein that talks about one of my two favorite political movies. First one is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Next time it comes around on Channel 39, make sure you watch it, because it shows how a tenderfoot lawyer who was really pretty inept at doing much of anything, through a combination of circumstances, got credit for something that he hadn't really done. And he parlayed that up to a seat in the Senate for one of the Western territories and potential candidacy for president. And it all came down to people being willing to do anything to support the man who shot Liberty Valance. Yeah. Well, he didn't really shoot Liberty Valance. And a spoiler alert here, at the end of the movie, his conscience, he has done so well moving up the ladder, and his conscience tells him that he's got to go in and talk to the editor of the Shinbone Daily Press. That's the town that they're living in. And he confesses, I didn't shoot Liberty Valance. Tom Donovan shot Liberty Valance. And I've gotten all this credit for it through my whole life. And now I've told you the whole story, and I want to know this. Are you going to print the truth? And the newspaper editor says, no. He said, when the legend becomes fact, you go with the legend. Now, if that were true in 1961, when the man who shot Liberty Valance was made, it's true in spades now, isn't it? When the legend becomes fact, you go with the legend, right? Yeah, and that's something that the mainstream media has embraced to a fairly well. So the final scene on the movie, the man who shot Liberty Valance and his wife are riding on a train to Washington, D.C., and the waiter in the club car does something for Liberty. I mean, for the man who shot Liberty Valance, who says, well, thank you very much for what you did for me. And he said, that's fine, sir. Nothing's too good for the man who shot Liberty Valance. So a classic example of the power of the media to shape political events. The other favorite movie is Miracle on 34th Street. So I've got an article here. I'll get into that. The Miracle on 34th Street shows how those who are elected to public office will always look for cover when it's time to make a hard decision that might cost them votes. In the familiar 1947 movie Miracle on 34th Street, faith and law come into comical conflict. As anyone who has seen the movie remembers, the plot concerns the identity of a jolly, portly, white-bearded old man, Edmund Gwynn, who calls himself Kris Kringle and claims to be the one and only Santa Claus. When the old man's apparent delusion lands him in a state mental institution, the film's romantic lead, a lawyer, sets out to free him. That would be John Payne. Not John Wayne, but John Payne. An involuntary commitment hearing is called to determine the purported Santa's sanity, and the old man's lawyer sets out to prove that his client is the true Santa. Now, that would take some real skill in legerdemain, wouldn't it? The district attorney argues that the existence of Santa Claus is not a proper subject for judicial inquiry. The judge considers this, but rules that the existence of Santa Claus is a factual issue to be resolved through evidence. The question of proof is somewhat difficult. How can the existence of Santa Claus be established using the tools of law when, as our lawyer hero explains, belief in Santa Claus is based on faith, as is religion? You know, any time that someone who purports to follow a religion is able to give a factual explanation for all aspects of what he calls a religion, it ain't a religion anymore, because the essential element for any religion is faith. Okay. Fortunately for movie watchers, the writers of Miracle on 34th Street were unfamiliar with the principle that courts are prohibited from resolving religious questions. Now, let me repeat that again. Courts are prohibited from resolving religious questions. Now, I'm going to come back and tell you how the trial turned out and how John Payne won the trial, but not just yet. Okay. 3 years before the release of the movie, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the United States versus Baird, which declares that the religion clauses of the First Amendment cordon off a forbidden domain that judges and juries may not enter. They may not attempt to determine the truth or falsity of religious claims. Since Ballard, the court has greatly expanded its articulation of this prohibition, stating that not only are courts prohibited from attempting to determine the truth of religious beliefs, but they also may not seek to resolve controversies over religious doctrine and practice, may not undertake interpretation of particular church doctrines and the importance of the doctrine to the religion. Now imagine Private Smuckahupkowitz, or Seaman Smuckahupkowitz comes in and says, Captain, I don't want to take that vaccine. I've got religious scruples against it. It's against my religion. And the captain says, well, okay, tell me what your religion is. Controversies, courts can't resolve controversy over religious doctrine and practice, may not undertake interpretation of particular church doctrines and the importance of these doctrines to the religion. You see how I'm saying that any naval officer that attempts, or Army officer that attempts to do this, potentially skating on some really thin ice. And may give no consideration of doctrinal matters, whether the ritual and liturgy of worship or the tenets of faith. Courts are thus said to be barred from resolving all questions about religious practices and doctrines. If the existence of Santa Claus is a religious question, courts may not answer it. In a famous old case, Employment Division versus Smith, the Supreme Court indicated that the prohibition against judicial resolution of religious questions should be understood to apply broadly and absolutely. Since that decision in 1990, however, courts have relied on the prohibition to dismiss a wide range of otherwise ordinary disputes whenever their resolution would require examination of religious matters. So you get the point. You know, that a court can't inquire into the aspects of someone's faith in order to resolve a question.
They can neither deny nor confirm.
Yeah, that would be the usual approach. So when Smuckahupkowitz says it's against my religion to take these vaccines, if a court can't do it, then I don't think an officer or a JAG officer would have the ability to do it either. So then you wind up, with a punitive action taken against Smuckahupkowitz, potentially a bad conduct discharge and other than honorable discharge, etc., which is defective because there's no basis, there's no real basis for it. So when I was talking with Ray this morning, my analysis was that the only fact to prove up is whether or not Smuckahupkowitz actually did ask for the religious exemption, not the basis for it, who backed it. Ray says they're sending people to the chaplain for this. I just don't see how this is going to work. Once again, referring to the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So, my curbstone opinion here is that if Snuffy comes forward and says, I want a religious exemption to the vaccine, unless he has done something stupid like telling his bunkmate, I don't have any religious scruples here at all. I'm just going to pull one over on the Army because I don't want them sticking needles in my arm. That's the kind of dispute that could be gotten into. But I heard somebody on the radio when I was in the States talking about the same subject, and an irate caller who was obviously on the other side of the game said, so have all of the religious dignitaries of the world, like the Pope, have they all decided that there's a religious exemption there? And the talk show host shut him up right away. He says, that's not what it's about. Religion is a personal thing. So a very interesting question. You know what my analysis is of it. Very long article, and as I didn't get into the exceptions because, as usual with anything that lawyers do, there are an abundance of exceptions to the rules.
Can I connect it to what's going on with Guam and the mandate in the executive branch and also in restaurants?
I think you can.
Okay, so you can apply for an exemption, and who considers a religious exemption? DPHSS? There
you go.
And they ought not be.
They're not.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be empowered to make that evaluation. If a court can't do it, then the director of public health, who denied sacraments to the church, would not be.
She's gone.
Yeah.
And then further, if someone is given a religious exemption, is it considered punitive that they would now still have to go through mandatory testing? Would that be a stretch to say persecution?
I think that'd be a stretch. Yeah.
Can I still claim it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be a stretch because, you know, as with any of the exceptions here, like the ADA exceptions, the concept of reasonable accommodation comes forward. And it may be a reasonable accommodation to a religious belief to say, we're not going to stick any needles in your arm, but we are going to stick a Q-tip up your nose. We're going to do it once a week. So that's more than likely would pass muster. An interesting subject nonetheless. Okay, let's head for Churchill Downs, then I'll get to Henry Rogers versus AT&T.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Hafude, konnichiwa,
Patois, ciao. Enter for a chance to win the 76 Circle K World Cuisine Giveaway. Be one of 3 lucky winners to win a passport of free food from around the world at over 15 different local restaurants. Just stop by any 76 Circle K, purchase $35 or more in fuel to get an entry form. Drive by today and taste the world with 76 Circle K's World Cuisine Giveaway. Visit 76circlekguam.com for more details. Some conditions apply. Circle K, take it easy.
So here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, the home stretch. That means I got about 9 more minutes of Tall Tales. I'm so glad to be back on the air. I've had a chance to scroll through the Facebook comments. I see there are a few folks out there that are glad to see me back too. So we're all happy today. I'm happy. I'm back on the air, back on the show. Tall Tales lives. Tall Tales rules, right, Jose?
Yes, sir.
There we go. Okay, final item here. This is Henry Rogers versus the AT&T. Now, Henry Rogers also goes by the name Ibram X. Kendi. Yeah. Ibram X. Kendi, born Ibram Henry Rogers, to a black liberation theology adhering tax accountant father and healthcare business analyst mother, is the prophet of wokedom, to whom the likes of Twitter's Jack Dempsey pays $10 million to prove his virtue. Kendi is a best-selling author across several categories with an ever-growing list of scholarly credentials and awards. He is ubiquitous in corporate media, on college campuses, and at elite conclaves. Perhaps most significant of all, Kendi's ideas are permeating the commanding heights of society, trickling into every aspect of American life, and therefore turning him into a transcendent figure. On the first day of the Biden-Harris presidency, the administration issued an executive order claiming, this is the first day of Bidenism, right? America suffers from systemic racism, manifested in entrenched disparities in our laws and public policies, in our public and private institutions, and charged the whole of the federal government with affirmatively advancing equity. Now, every time I see the word equity, I get scared. And, you know, of course, we have the word equity and the word equality and the word equal. So we have our 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which I used to think I had a pretty good handle on. Now I'm not so sure. The 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, I used to think equal meant everybody is treated the same. Equality, if we have equality amongst the people, all of the people are treated the same. Abraham X. Kendi, also known as Henry Rogers, has changed the definition of equality, so now that we use equity instead. So the Henry Rogers approach would be this. If we have, say, 11% of the people in the United States are African Americans, and say, I don't know, 70% are Caucasians, when it comes to any figures of worthwhile undertaking or rewards, if 11% of those people are not African Americans, it's wrong, because there's no equity. And equity means taking something away from the 70% and giving it to the 11% so that they all come out even, because there can be no explanation as to why the 11% are not represented in the group other than systemic racism. You understand that, right, Jose?
Like a golfing handicap.
Yeah, yeah. So if we were to do a census of how many millionaires there are in the United States, 11% of the millionaires got to be African American, because if they're not, only one answer:
racist,
systemic racism. And I gave my own example here, I think before I left, and that's professional basketball. Now, in professional basketball, 70% of the players are African Americans. And professional basketball players make they make millions of dollars a year in salary. For endorsing shoelaces, they make a couple million more, right? So they make huge amounts of money. But the only reason that 70% of national basketball players are African Americans, systemic racism. Not what you're thinking. Systemic racism, because there's no other way that these African Americans can make that kind of money doing anything else except, so they're forced into professional basketball. Otherwise, they couldn't have the millions of dollars a year in salary and millions of dollars a year in endorsements. Answer's got to be systemic racism.
Poor guys.
Yeah, and there's the proof. You know, they got to be professional basketball players to make that kind of money. So back to this article here. Numerous other government and private institutions are following suit. Oakland is testing a program to provide 600 black, indigenous, or otherwise non-white families, and only these families, $500 per month for 18 months. A Boston medical center is implementing a pilot program to offer preferential care based on race and race-explicit interventions. Cultural race theory, ethnic studies, and a panoply of related teachings such as the 1619 Project version of American history pervade U.S. schools while their supporters wage a war on merit for diversity and against any teacher who would dare dissent. So merit is systemic racism. If we say we'll give scholarships to the students that have the greatest potential to learn, unless it works out right, it's systemic. If 11% of those people are not African Americans, no good. More than 100 executives leading major businesses recently came together to discuss ways they could swing their weight to challenge voting legislation, including Georgia's, that they dishonestly portrayed as discriminatory. Well, Georgia legislation is discriminatory because, because of that law, nobody's going to get to vote any more than one time in any election. Voter suppression. Okay, I'll come back to this tomorrow. Really great to be back. Tailgaters, adios, hasta gupalai.
The Point is KUSG, Hagatna, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Biden meets with global leaders. I'm Mary Corsetti, Fox News. President Biden met with G20 world leaders in Rome, Italy, Sunday to discuss many topics ranging from supply chain challenges to a global minimum corporate tax.
In terms of what President Biden worked on today, the president met with the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and raised issues of human rights and concerns over the NATO ally, which is Turkey's purchase of Russian missile defense systems. And also, Erdogan says that he told Biden about Ankara's displeasure with Washington's support for the YPG Kurdish militia. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke of the removal of tariffs on European aluminum and steel, which was decided today as a major step forward